My name is Becca, and I am so excited to talk to you about a critical yet often overlooked topic, which is how fear robs us of rest in the workplace. So, last month we talked about rest and how necessary it is to our health and well being. So, while there are several things that do rob us of our rest, this month we are going to focus in on fear. So, before we begin, I want you to just take a moment and think about your typical workday. Do you ever find yourself feeling anxious about meeting deadlines, worried about making mistakes? Maybe you're stressed about how others are perceiving your work. These feelings are common and very normal, but a lot of times they stem from various fears that many of us face in our professional lives. So, the purpose of today's presentation is to discover the impacts that fear has on us physically and emotionally, how it affects the workplace, your rest, and I want to provide you with some practical strategies to push past them and reclaim a sense of rest and balance in your work life. So, for those of you who have come and been a part of our Whiteboard Wednesday before or been a part of any of our workshops, you know that we really like to focus on hard skills versus soft skills and really what are the differences between the two. So we have our hard skills, which are our technical skills, and then we have our soft skills, which is our people skills, our interpersonal skills. So today, as we're going to be talking about fear, what is interesting is a lot of times we stay in the soft skill land and we are developing the people skills, but fear affects all of it. With fear, if you are like fearful of something in the workplace, it can hold you back, not only from being a good communicator, but it can actually prevent you from being creative when you're working. So we are going to be focusing in on all of this because fear affects your hard skills and also your soft skills. So as we're jumping in, there are a few statistics that were absolutely mind-blowing to me because I think sometimes, especially when we think of fear, sometimes we might think we're alone in certain things that we think, whether it's true or whether it's not. And so I was like, you know what? There are some things and some fears that I personally have. I'm just curious, like, if I was to just do a quick Google search, how many other people also have a lot of fears? And you wouldn't be surprised. I was a little surprised, but I shouldn't be, to find out that 87% of employees suffer from work-related fears. 81% of employees admit that their fears and phobias have affected their job in various negative ways. 25% of employees have never sought help to overcome their anxieties, and 80% of employees believe having fears or phobias is something to be ashamed of. So why am I sharing these statistics with you? Because you are not alone. Fear is normal and everybody experiences fear. So what exactly is fear? So, psychologists define fear as a protective, primal emotion that evokes a biochemical and emotional response. So, fear alerts us to the presence of danger or the threat of harm, whether that is physical or psychological. And what I love about this is whether it is actual or imagined. Everyone experiences fear. It is one of the most basic human emotions, and some have said it's the most powerful of all emotions. Fear manifests itself in different ways. So there are good fears, such as wanting to be careful when you're around wild animals so you don't get hurt. And then there's also fears that, are good fears. And these types of fears are the things that can really help you push out of your comfort zone. Such as public speaking. So ultimately, it is important to understand how certain fears impact us physically and emotionally. So let's look at a few different ways that fear can actually manifest itself. So from a physical standpoint, these are things like chest pain, chills, dry mouth, nausea, rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, sweating, trembling, upset stomach, right? Have any of you ever been nervous? Maybe you have a project, maybe it is a presentation, a training that you're about to facilitate, and then all of a sudden you're like your stomach starts to hurt a little bit, right? It might be the response of, I need to go to the bathroom really quick, or I need to pat my forehead. So we all have different responses to this fear. And we might label it different, like we might label it as being nervous or whatever, but deep, deep down, there is a deeply rooted fear. Now, let's look at some emotional responses. So, this could be anxiety or worry, frustration, anger, embarrassment or humiliation, guilt, shame, sadness, helplessness, feeling overwhelmed, or maybe it's this feeling of out of control. And so some of these words, we can look at this, but if you were to think back to maybe something where you experienced, frustration at work, or maybe you were having anxiety about work, we really want to dig into that and identify where is this stemming from? Because is it actual? Is it imagined? Is it true? Is it not true? And when we can dig into the source of some of these fears, we can answer some of those questions, and then we can start moving past it and walking into it with confidence. Let's go ahead and just talk about how fear affects the workplace. So, depending on what your role is, so you might be sitting here as an employer, you might be sitting here as an employee. So, we're just going to do a little bit of side by side because I think in the workplace, it can be easy to look at yourself and say, well, I must be the only one that is experiencing this, or so and so is causing this in me. So we're just going to do a little side by side because I think that regardless of role, regardless of title, I think that we're going to see that a lot of us, we are all humans and we experience very similar emotions and fears, maybe just at different levels. So, an employer, a really common employer fear is fear of failure. And what's crazy is it's the same exact thing for employees. So when I was doing some research into this fear, this was the number one fear in the workplace was fear of failure. Another common one is not being good enough. But whereas for an employee, it's maybe not being smart enough, not having all the answers, making a mistake, everyone quitting, getting fired, bad reputation, worried about what others might think, fear of rejection, giving feedback, receiving feedback, not being able to take care of employees and provide for their family, whereas a lot of times the employee fears not being able to provide for their family. And so I want to focus in on this because, again, I think sometimes it is easy for us to really isolate ourselves and our own fears. But when we can start to look at everyone around us, our employees, our leaders, our owners, as like all humans with these certain types of fears, then we can start to realize like how's our fear impacting the workplace. So if you are an employer, right? And you have a fear of failure, then how is that being translated to your staff? Are you potentially creating with sometimes without realizing it, you might be operating out of fear, which is then causing your team to fear. So some common things that, I've heard from people is, and I've experienced it myself, is, well, you're replaceable. We don't need you. Or, well, you're going to make this company fail. Crazy how our responses to those fears, how it actually impacts everyone around us. And so it's good to recognize this because we want to make sure that we are creating healthy cultures where people feel safe and where they also feel safe to where they can be honest about where they're at. Because if we are creating a culture that stems out of a place of fear, then you are losing creativity, productivity. You are not getting the best from yourself or your staff. So, as leaders, it's on us to acknowledge these fears and establish a workplace where employees feel empowered, safe, supported. And as employees, it's on us to recognize our fears and not let it hold us back from our full potential. I was reading this blog on LinkedIn, and it was from Joni Nagel. Not quite sure how to say her last name, but I just wanted to read this snippet really quick. So she says, fear shuts down the part of the human brain which deals with creative risk taking and decision making. It activates our reptilian brain, and this is the part controlling our fight or flight response. So in times of fear, a brain scan will actually show the middle part of the brain, this is the feeling part, lit up, while the frontal lobe, the thinking part, is dark. So my point in saying this is that if you can't think clearly, you cannot provide peak performance. A great analogy from a speaker and author, Scott Motz, is if you only put 10 watts of energy into a 100-watt bulb, it will become a 10-watt bulb. Fear minimizes performance. So let's also talk about how fear affects rest. So now, if we are operating out of place of fear and we are not approaching it head on, what actually happens is it robs us of our rest. When we give energy to our negative fears, we are giving all of ourselves to it. And it affects us in all of our different areas of life. And so one way that this might look of how it steals your rest is you're falling asleep at work. Have you ever just been so exhausted where you are afraid to even step away from your desk because maybe if you don't answer that email right away, then maybe you're not valuable anymore, right? So it's almost like you have to work these crazy hours in order to prove your worth. Or it could be multitasking, that you have to handle all the projects on your desk because if you delegate it, then you are potentially going to get fired because you're not giving enough. What about this fear of conflict? I know none of us are afraid of conflict or confrontation, right? Because those are really easy conversations to approach. But the reality is that a lot of times that fear actually makes us hide. So whether it's physical or it's emotional, we are hiding because the thought of offending someone or the thought of if I bring something to the surface, I'm going to get fired, it actually makes you hide. Not taking breaks. I know that I'm guilty of this where I have been multitasking and then all of a sudden I have all this on my plate and then now I'm like working through my lunches, I'm working through breaks, I'm working through. So this is another really common side of it. So what is that fear? And then the late nights. Is it like, well, I have to be available 24/7 or else I'm going to get fired? And I keep using this getting it fired example because so many of us pour ourselves into our work out of this fear of getting fired. Because when we think of this fear of getting fired, we think of, our income, we think of the ability to provide for our family, to provide for ourselves, provide for our community. So we overwork ourselves to the point to where we are eating all of our meals in front of our desk. We're saying yes to work and saying no to the other parts of our life, which takes away from our rest. I think sometimes we are afraid that, if we're not working all hours or if we are not having sticky notes all over our desk, that we could be perceived as lazy or maybe perceived as unproductive. So what we have to do is we have to be able to, first of all, acknowledge the fear. These things. We actually did this other presentation and it was talking about, our beliefs and how our beliefs impact our behavior. So sometimes, especially in fear, our behavior, we don't really know why we're doing these things. So we have to like walk backwards to figure out what is it that we really believe about ourselves. And what is that fear? Is it true? Is it not true? So what we need to do is step one, we just need to acknowledge it. So acknowledge when you're not taking a break. Acknowledge when you are working through. You're missing plays. You're missing family outings. You are saying no to friends, family, whatever it is. We need to acknowledge when we are saying no to other parts of our life and saying yes to work. And then from there, we need to start thinking about like, well, why am I doing this? Why am I saying yes to work instead of going to dinner with my family? We just need to really acknowledge it that, oh, I'm afraid that if I don't get all of this work done, then my boss is going to see me as dispensable, or my team is going to see me as lazy, right? And is that true? Is it not true? Another thing, so step one, acknowledge the fear. Step two, understand that these fears can actually be positive. Okay, so if you have a hard time delegating because you fear that you have to provide all of the information, or you could be perceived as not smart or maybe not as a good leader, well, okay, so how can we turn this fear around and turn this into a positive? We can turn this into, okay, because I am so smart and because I do understand these processes so well, and I do understand how all of these things work together to get the job done, I need to delegate this to my team. How amazing if other people on my team also knew these things. Then another thing with that is step three. Sometimes we just need to face the challenges head on. So if you have a fear of public speaking, okay, well, what is one step that you can do to walk into it? So sometimes that one step might just be, let me just write a script. If I have a public speaking thing coming up, okay, let me just kind of write out some of my thoughts. So facing challenges head on. And then step four. So one of the things that we have to do a better job of is we have to celebrate the wins throughout. Because if we are not recognizing that the small wins are not actually small, they're big wins. And so something I used to do back when I was, over HR at the firm that I was previously at, if I had an employee come in who received an email that they were really offended by, or they didn't know how to respond to because they thought that person was mad at them, and now they were afraid, they were fearful that this person was mad at them, they didn't know how to respond, then we would celebrate when they responded or when they went to the person directly instead of emailing back. So we would celebrate that. So find the ways to win, celebrate wins as you're working through these fears. And it's amazing when you look back on your life at the things that you were once so afraid of and the progress that you have seen throughout. Just as a practical application, as we are now, ending this presentation, I have two questions for you that I want you to think about. How do you experience fear? Everyone has a different physical and emotional response to fear. So how do you experience it? And then secondly, is what is one fear that you need to verbalize to a trusted source? So sometimes it is just purely talking about the thing, talking about whatever it is that is causing you this anxiety, that is causing you this stress. When we can surround ourselves or have people that we can go to in a confidential, trusted, and safe place to actually just talk out what we're deeply afraid of or these fears, then we can start working through it. So thank you so much for just being a part of this presentation. But just some additional resources. We have a YouTube channel. We have one video that is all about your beliefs and how it impacts your behavior. So I highly encourage you to just check it out. Go watch them. They're 10 to 15 minutes. And then please just use us, talk to us. We want to be there for you. And so if there's any way that we can help you work through your fears, I want you to contact me, reach out to us on our website. You can schedule a call, but we would just love to just be in community with you and help you walk through your fears confidently. All right, my name is Becca. Thank you so much for tuning in.